We're going to start our Shibori techniques with the wood grain stitch. I explained a little bit about this in an earlier video talking about basic Shibori techniques. So you will know that this is simply the running stitch, that you put lines of running stitch close together, and when gathered or pulled and then dyed, a pattern is created like the one you see here. This particular textile is Japanese, and it's a kind of room or doorway divider. Here's another example on a scarf that I picked up in Nepal. It was very lightweight and gauzy, and what's particularly helpful in terms of this class is to see how it's made. It's really quite obvious. When we come closer, we can see that the fabric was folded in half, and it's very clear where that halfway mark is. So that's what I would recommend doing in general is time is money, but also economy. Shortcuts are good, but being wise, economical with your time is important. And certainly on a lightweight fabric like this, you can do that. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty now of how to do the wood grain stitch. Okay, so I'm going to start on my wood grain stitch. I'm using this cotton linen napkin, and this is going to serve as my template for my circle plate here. So I folded this and I ironed it too, just because I thought it would be a little bit easier. And then I'm going to try and place my plate midway. And I've got some tailor's chalk here. You want to use 100%, do not want to use a ballpoint pen because that will not wash out. So something that will wash out for sure. Okay, there's my circle. That's going to be my guideline for my first row of stitches. Okay, to begin the wood grain stitch, or stitch shibori, first off, I've got my thread. This is 100% polyester. Mainly, I feel it's going to be stronger. Instead of using this, you actually could use dental floss if you wanted, and I have doubled it. And that's kind of important to this whole thing, particularly when you go to tie it off. So, at some point in your life, I'm going to have to assume you've done the running stitch. In and out, up and down. Here I go. And I'm pulling this through. And remember that wherever your needle has pierced the cloth, there will be a dot there of white. It will resist. Now before I get to the end, I'm going to just insert between my threads this little piece of cloth, so that should something come loose in the whole process, this little piece of cloth is actually going to stop that from happening. And I picked this tip up on another artist's presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to continue around until I finish this circle. You don't want to make your thread too long, and potentially when your thread gets too long, then sometimes it gets tangled and then you've got a whole nother mess on your hands. So ideally, and we shall see whether my thread is long enough to do this whole circle. I sure hope that it is. Okay, I have finished my stitching and got a little bit oval towards the center, but I honestly don't think that's going to matter. The key to the wood grain stitch is to have these running stitches close together, And my next step is that I'm going to be pulling these, gathering them tight. And I never made a knot when I did this. I just cut them off. But now I'm going to be making my knot. And I'm going to again take a little piece of fabric and tie my knot. And all I'm doing is essentially a granny knot. And sorry, I'm not zoomed in, but I think that everyone knows probably how to do a granny knot. And struggling a bit here because I've got this so tight. There we go. And I want to make sure that my little piece of fabric is there. Okay, so, and there we go. So now I need to do that for every row that I have. So here's my fabric, pulled, gathered, and tied. And as I was doing this, I did have two of my lines break. And then you just sort of have to improvise. The other thing I had was, because I had those break, I became a little bit worried about pulling too hard. So I kind of pulled halfway, tied it off, and then I decided to go back to the end where it started and pull again. So I think that's looking pretty tight, pretty good, but that's pretty much how it has to be to resist. These are all called resist techniques, and it has to be this tight to resist the indigo dye. So my next step is going to be to wet this. And if you really want to get a nice even dye, I would recommend soaking it for a longer period of time, like up to an hour. I've heard of people doing it overnight. I'm not going to do that. But I'm definitely going to soak this, in particular because this is a thicker fabric, this cotton and linen. All right, one done. So how did it turn out? Let's take a look. Success! There it is. So what I'm happy about is that I did pull my thread tight and it resisted the dye. What I'm not so happy about is that I don't have a perfect ground, so that blue around the circle is not perfect, and it looks to me like the fabric kind of stuck together, and even though it was being submerged, that area particularly that you see on the lower left hand side looks like maybe two wings, kind of stuck together and wasn't oxidizing each time I brought it up. So in the future, when I do this technique, I'm going to be sure to try and open my fabric a bit more so that all of it is oxidizing between each dip. And here I think you see pretty clearly where my center mark was, where I folded, and those little dots really are my knots that I had at the end. But all in all, pretty good effort for the wood grain stitch. So now it's your turn. Give it a try.